Hello, everybody. Oh, that is loud. Okay. Hello, everybody. I just want to welcome everybody here. This is kind of weird sitting here at this moment. Filling in for Craig. Call this meeting to order, the Committee of the Whole meeting on November 14th, 2022 at 1:01 p.m. First item is to ask for a motion from Councillor Jenny Jones. Be it resolved that Council adopt the agenda for November 14th, 2022, Committee of the Whole meeting as presented.
I will give you that motion.
Yeah. Just carry. You don't have to. Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah, that's right. All those in favor? There's only 4. What the? Okay, that's motion's carried. Item number 3.1, adoption of minutes. October 24th, 2022, Committee of the Whole meeting minutes. Ask for a motion from Councillor Kinghorn. Be it resolved that the Committee of the Whole adopt the minutes from the October 24th, 2022, Committee of the Whole meeting as presented.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Barton. I'll give you that motion. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's weird. I just can't wait till Craig gets back here. I guess it's everybody in favor? Motion carried. All right, move on to item number 4.1. We have a delegation here today. Hello, Michael. The CMRB Chair and Chief Officer presentations to members with Greg Clark and Jordan Copping. Welcome, everyone. How are you guys?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor and councillors. It's great to be here. Always good to travel around the region. Always nice to get, Jordan and I were commenting on as we drove down just how lucky we are to live in this place. We just look out west in the mountains and the prairies, and it's a beautiful, beautiful town here to drive into and spend some time in. So it's something Jordan and I feel pretty passionate about and pretty strongly about, that we live in the greatest part of the whole wide world, and we're pretty lucky. So we're pretty lucky guys to have the jobs that we do. So just want to thank each of you for the opportunity to present here to High River Council, and also for your service to your community and to our region and our province. So thank you very much for that. It's not always an easy job, so we just want to acknowledge and recognize that. I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of the Calgary metropolitan region. I know some of you are quite familiar with us. Others are newer, so what we'll do is step relatively quickly through this. There's a presentation here before you. If you have questions along the way, feel free to stop us if you do have questions. Otherwise, we'll leave ample time at the end here for discussion and Q&A. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Growth management boards in the province of Alberta have had sort of an up and down history. This particular iteration was formed as a result of the Modernized Municipal Government Act in 2017. The CMRB formally came into existence on the 1st of January 2018 with a mandate to establish growth and servicing plans for the region. We'll hop on to the next slide there. We have 8 municipalities in the Calgary metropolitan region, about 8,500 square kilometers, and I'd say by now more than 1.574 million people. By the latest census, that's our number, although we know with the number of people who are moving to this region, that number has almost certainly gone higher. And part of our mandate, if we can move on to the next slide, please, thank you, is to promote and achieve long-term sustainability of our region. And by that we mean sustainability economically, sustainability environmentally in terms of limiting the amount of land use, being as efficient, as effective as we can on servicing, sharing costs, reducing it wherever possible, water use, addressing wastewater questions, and then working together on regional economic development opportunities. Jordan's going to talk in more detail about how some of this mandate translates into action today. I like to break it up into the kind of black letter rule sort of approach, which follows from the growth and servicing plans, and then some of the higher order opportunity in terms of engagement with Indigenous people, for example, putting together a regional Indigenous relations strategy, regional economic development opportunities. There's a number of other initiatives that the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board is undertaking that Jordan's going to talk about. So he gets the good stuff in this presentation. We'll go on to the next slide. I won't spend much time on the details of the vision, other than to say that we had a really strong collaborative process through 2021, coming up with our board vision, or updated board vision. I think it's quite inclusive of what we're trying to achieve together as a group. Obviously, we'll leave that behind, and happy to answer any questions. We'll go on to the next slide, and it breaks out some of what I've been talking about, of why the Calgary Metropolitan Region exists, and some of the elements of that. And just I'll point out just a couple. The blueprint for growth, committing to preferred place types. We refer to that as certain things are meant to go in certain places. And when those things are in those places, it should be relatively straightforward to see that that happens and is approved and moves forward relatively quickly. From an investment perspective and an investor and development perspective, the idea is to streamline that process, build in predictability. That's what we hear from our stakeholders in the development community on a regular basis. Is we'd like to know what the rules are, know that they're consistently applied, and that we can plan accordingly and invest accordingly. And that's really the idea, is that we're unlocking investment by creating a common set of rules throughout the region for where things should go. And if you're investing in those places, you should have a fairly straightforward path, so long as it meets the objectives and the criteria and the growth and servicing plans. We'll go on to the next slide, and again, happy to talk about any of these things in detail as we go. One of the, I think this council and certainly Mayor Snodgrass is certainly well aware, but one of the more interesting statistics that I've come to learn about our region, we have about 40% of the population of the province of Alberta, and we have access to about 4% of the fresh water in the province of Alberta. And so stewarding our resources, our freshwater resources in particular, is a significant concern, a significant challenge for all of us, and making sure that we're being as efficient and effective as possible with the scarce freshwater resources that we have. So water stewardship is a significant focus for the board. Again, Jordan's going to talk about a project that we have underway that we're going to undertake around water stewardship specifically. I think I'll just maybe pause on that one and keep rolling ahead into the structure of the board. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So our board structure is relatively simple. We have a board made up of the 8-member municipalities. Of course, you know, the representatives are the mayors and reeves of our region, as well as designates on the board level as well as at our committee level. Our committee structure is made up of 2 committees, land use and servicing and governance. Up until last year, there was a standalone advocacy committee that was dissolved just before the municipal elections in fall of 2021 in favor of moving the advocacy function up into the board level. That's, I think, been a fairly effective change. We didn't have a lot that was going to advocacy, and those issues did tend to merit board attention anyway. So the board would advocate for EMS service, for example, write letters to the minister. We had the Minister of Health, in fact, come and visit not so long ago to engage with the board on issues of mutual concern to a number of member municipalities. So the idea is strength in numbers. If there's an opportunity there for us to combine our advocacy to the province, we take every opportunity to do that. And just so you know, in terms of history, land use and servicing were 2 different committees initially, and those were combined again. Those are common topics. Our objective is to have just as much administration and just as much committee work as we need, but not more than that. So we're always looking for opportunities to streamline, and those are 2 examples, I think, where we've done that. We'll move on to the next slide. Really just an overview of some of what I've talked about. Jordan's going to get into some of the numbers, but we have some quite good data that tells us we can be saving upwards of a third, maybe even 40% in terms of dollars and cents by sharing infrastructure. If you can imagine through regional planning, if we could save ourselves just one overpass, that's going to save tens of millions of dollars in cost. And there's tremendous benefit. If we can have some shared services, that will of course save money. And if we can do it in an optimized way, that'll have a reduced impact on water use, wastewater, those kinds of things as well. We've talked about the greater market certainty as well. We feel there's significant benefits in regional coordination, regional cooperation. It doesn't come without some challenge at times. There's some give and take and some discussion that's always required in doing that. But we feel pretty strongly there's a significant benefit in doing that. And if we follow it through to its logical conclusion, we can realize those benefits. And again, Jordan will get into some of that. So just last slide for me is the next slide. Timeline-wise, in spring of 2021, the board approved a draft growth and servicing plan, submitted those to the minister for feedback. Then Minister McIver sat with the board in March of 22. Of course, there was a municipal election, as you well know, in the interim. The minister accepted those changes and provided us with the details in June, ultimately approved the growth and servicing plans on the 11th of July of this year, and they came into force on the 15th of August of 2022. With that, we'll turn it over to Jordan, and he can talk about some of the specifics that the minister changed in the proposed growth and servicing plans, and then on to the plans going forward.
Thanks, Greg, and thank you very much for having us here, members of council. Next slide, please. So I'm going to kind of maybe focus a little bit on the changes that the minister made to the growth and servicing plans, recognizing there's a little bit of overlap of folks that were there when the plans were developed and some new faces around the table. Fundamentally, as Greg already mentioned, the growth plan really is predicated on the idea that certain things go in certain places. And what we're trying to do is create a slightly higher and logical development pattern, slightly higher density and logical development pattern. And that's how you get the savings in terms of land use, less water use, greater savings in terms of efficiency. And we'll touch on that a little bit more detail there. However, the minister did come back and directed several significant changes to the plan and to the ref, and they're kind of outlined before you. So the most significant one in terms of the growth plan was really the creation of rural employment areas. So the minister felt that there was a deficiency in the plan, that it didn't really provide for low density employment areas. Previously, the plan had really stated that all employment areas needed to go into a preferred growth area, and I'll dive into what that is here on the next slide. So, however, he did recognize the fact that there is I would say, concern from some of the members about these rural employment areas in terms of a location, and so made a 2-kilometer buffer from preferred growth areas, and also a 2-kilometer buffer from another rural employment area, and that these cannot be located in a preferred growth area. The second change that was pretty significant was in the REF, so the Regional Evaluation Framework, and that's the process that we use as administration to look at statutory plans as they come in and determine whether or not they meet the policies in the growth plan. And so here, the minister was really focused on reducing bureaucracy and the red tape. And so you can see what it really created was a much higher threshold before something had to come through the REF review. And this is something that we've debated since the inception of the board, is what constitutes regional significance? Where do you draw the line? We did this exercise twice with members of municipal administrations, and Khalid was there, and he'll know. And everyone, no one could agree on what it was. And so we kind of set a level and said, sure. And originally it was 50 dwelling units. And if I recall correctly, any employment area that was bigger than 20 acres or had more than 5 individual lots. And no one really liked it, but no one could come up with something better. And so we carried that on through into the REF. However, the minister felt that that threshold was too low and instituted the thresholds that you see there, with and also a unique distinction that if it's going into a preferred growth area, the threshold for review of it against the growth plan has to be higher. It is worth noting, though, that even if an application or a development doesn't need to come through the REF process, it still needs to adhere to the policies contained in the growth plan. And the minister was really clear about that and actually put that into the REF document as an additional point on that. So we'll just go to the next slide, please. So we can see here, this is kind of speaks to the preferred growth areas. So what you have in front of you there is it outlines the preferred growth areas. So we have 3 different types. One is every urban municipality within the region is in and of itself a preferred growth area. So there's 6 urban municipalities. Each rural municipality has 3 hamlet growth areas. So as you can see in Rocky View County, that is Harmony, Langdon, and Bragg Creek. In Foothills County, at the time when we finalized the plan, the county did not feel that it was in a position to state where those preferred growth areas would be, whether it would be a new hamlet growth area or whether they would add on to an existing one. And so the board made the decision that Foothills would be able to determine those 3 hamlet growth areas at a later date, providing they met the requirements that are laid out in the growth plan, and that was unanimously voted on by the board and supported there. And then there's the joint planning areas, of which High River is a member of one. So JPA 4, you can see it down there at the bottom. It kind of extends halfway up between Okotoks and High River, taking in the Highway 2A corridor and then bumping out onto the east side of Highway 2, just directly east of High River here. And so those are all considered preferred growth areas. We just go to just the last point I just wanted to make is that existing statutory plans can be amended to conform to the growth plan, but cannot increase the overall population if outside of a preferred growth area. And so the way that the organization is structured is that any statutory plans that were approved prior to the existence of the CMRB, so prior to January 1st, 2018, or anything that was approved under the IGP is grandfathered in. I know there's another term I'm supposed to use, but I can't remember it right off the top of my head right now. If you're going to amend it, you have to make the change, but we, through dialogue with the technical advisory group, we kind of looked at it that you can make the change to amend it, but it just can't increase the overall population. So you can change the structure, you can change how it looks, but you can't suddenly go from, a development of 800 people to a development of 1,500 people. All right, next slide, please. So as Greg already hinted at, and he's jealous because I get to speak to this slide in the presentation, that there are significant benefits, and these are calculated based on modeling. So when we developed the growth plan, the consultants they did a business as usual scenario, and then they did another scenario that is essentially what they ended up calling the synthesis scenario. And I won't bore everybody with the details, but at the end of the day, if the growth plan follows if we follow the build out as is outlined in the growth plan, these are the benefits that we're going to see. So a 36% reduction in the amount and cost of new infrastructure, 23% reduction in water consumption per household, 41% reduction in land consumption, and that 31% reduction in VKT that you see outlined there. So really significant savings. And this is of the build out over the next 1 million people. So when we created the growth and servicing plans, the board decided that they didn't want to set necessarily a timeline, but a threshold. And so they said the next 1 million people, which we're anticipating sometime between 2050 and 2053, according to population projections. So we're really only looking 30 years out, and we'll have another 1 million people. We'll go from that 1.587 to 2.587 in the CMR. So significant growth, significant pressure on our infrastructure, significant pressure on our land, and significant pressure on our water. And so that's why it's really critical that we start working together now.
Where do you feel people?
Sorry, say again?
Where do you see like 1 million people?
So I'm going to get this wrong, so don't take this to the bank, but I believe in the population projections that we did in 2018, High River is going to double. The bulk of the population obviously is going to go to Calgary, but Calgary is going to change from having about 84% of the regional population down to about 81%. So they will not take the same 84% of the next 1 million people coming into the city. We're going to see substantial growth in actually all of the urban municipalities and growth in the rural municipalities as well.
We can get you the formal, the projections specifically.
It's on the website. However, I will say what I said in the meeting. The only thing we can really be certain of is that the projections are wrong. But in terms of a indicator or an order of magnitude, that is what we're projected to receive. And you've seen the growth that's happening, even since the end of COVID in our region has been quite significant. I think Calgary's projected to add another 80,000 people in the next 3 years. So,
Sorry, in the next what?
3 years.
Only 80? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, the projections are wrong as soon as you publish them, but that's my understanding. Yes, those aren't my projections; those are others. So.
Yeah, I remember having a discussion with Mayor Nenshi, and he was saying that they grow the size of red deer every year
Yeah,
in Calgary. How do you manage that growth?
that could be historic as well.
Yeah.
Right. But we are seeing that massive draw to our region. As we see the economy pick back up, as we see COVID moving to living with COVID, and those types of changes, we are seeing massive growth again. So I believe that we have, Cochrane, Airdrie, and Chestermere are three of the highest growing municipalities in the province, like in terms of percentage. So the people are coming, and unless we close the doors and say no thank you, it behooves us to be ready for it. So how are we going to work together in an effective and efficient way to to be ready for that and not be dealing with the problems of growth, rather be ready for them, and so we don't actually get to insane cost of housing, incredibly costly traffic, all those kinds of things. So that is really the intent of the growth plans, is to be ready for that. Next slide, please. So the regional servicing plan is a companion document to the growth plan. It's important to note that it's not a statutory plan. It's not approved by the minister. It's just filed with the minister. In the regulation, the servicing plan has to support the growth that's outlined in the growth plan, but we have more, I would say, flexibility with ourselves in terms of how we deal with the wording of it and how we want to work together. But a couple of key things is, one is that the priority growth areas are priority servicing areas. And so that was really key, because it has allowed for conversations to start, almost even before the growth plan was fully approved by the minister, in terms of working together between Cochrane, Rocky View County, and the City of Calgary for water in the Harmony area. Meeting, both Cochrane's needs, Harmony's needs, and how do we look at a multi-municipal solution to water and wastewater challenges that they're experiencing in that area. And so we're really starting to see that come to fruition, because there is a certain degree of confidence that we know where the growth is going to go. And so investing in that infrastructure and knowing that that's where it's going to be has allowed for this type of dialogue to happen. We also see there's a focus on transportation and transit, and I'll speak to more or less all of these as we go forward. The long-term water strategy, water, wastewater utilities, stormwater management, and recreation. The recreation is a little bit of a unique beast, and the main reason for that is, as we were developing the growth and servicing plans, the province created the requirement for all municipalities to create IDPs. And we took a look at it, and if we added recreation to the required components of the servicing plan, it absolved all of our members from creating IDPs with each other. And so it was a massive cost savings and time savings for the members. And so that's why recreation was added in by the board. The other ones are really actually listed out in the regulation. In terms of recreation, it is voluntary. And so we're looking at a voluntary way for the members to work together. And so we're starting to see that kick off kind of in the next year, but we're really focused on some of the mandatory requirements that the members are really focused on. And so that's where you see 4 of the above areas are being advanced. Recreation is the outlier there. Next slide, please. So we've kind of gone through, as Greg had highlighted, we have to do, and that was the development of the growth and servicing plans that were outlined in regulation. And now we're moving on to the also. To a degree, some of it's also implementing. So right now, working on what we call the DEAL, or digitization of existing and approved land use. And so really, this is fundamental data that will help us inform future projects. And it was version 1 of the DEAL data that allowed us to do all the modeling, or allowed the consultants to do all the modeling, so that we could figure out the synthesis scenario that we see reflected in the growth plan. We're also underway. We actually have the kickoff meeting tomorrow for the regional economic development vision and framework. And so the consultants are going to create a gap analysis to identify what is missing in the region. And this is really, there's a lot of organizations that play in this space. We've got, you know, a provincial one that does tourism. We have local ones that do tourism. We have a provincial one that does foreign direct investment. There's, you know, multiple municipalities that do their own work on that. And so what is missing? What could we be pursuing that way? And then help the board create a vision to work together in that framework. But it's going to stop before it says, and you should have Calgary Regional Economic Development or something along those lines. The work's going to stop before we get there. That is out of scope. Part of the reason is when we were doing the strategy session, Mayor Gondek raised the fact that, well, do you want me to talk to Calgary Economic Development about changing its mandate? And the board was quite in agreement with that, as it's already an existing organization. But we need to make sure that we've agreed upon how we're going to work together before we move on to the structure and actually doing that. And so this is pretty exciting work, and we're pretty jazzed to get going on it here. The last part on that one is that we're going to use this initiative to leverage the business community that the region is working together. Our region has a little bit of a reputation that we don't necessarily always get along with each other, and that can impact business development and business investment decisions. Over the last decade, we are the region that has the most 690 challenges, and so that sometimes makes business a little skittish about investing. That I could get approval from one municipality, but then have to go through a pretty lengthy quasi-judicial process in order to get the process or to get the development across the line. Next slide, please. As Greg had mentioned, fostering stronger relations with Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations in and surrounding the region has been really important to the board from day one. So this is something we've been working on consistently really since really kicked off in 2019. But we have a clear, we call it the Indigenous Relations effort version 2. And you can see outlined there. So we're currently working actively on initiative number 3, so co-create. And what we're seeing is a desire from Indigenous nations to add land to the reserve. Just for your edification, so there is in some of the global settlement agreements that the federal government is reaching with Indigenous nations for not adhering to original treaty claims, we're seeing the ability for Indigenous nations to add to their reserve. The unique feature of this is it doesn't need to be contiguous. So a nation from anywhere in the province of Alberta, if they get this global settlement agreement, would be able to purchase a piece of land somewhere else in the province and add it to the reserve. So what we're doing, and we're kind of following in the footsteps of the city of Edmonton, is creating a framework amongst the 8 member municipalities in terms of how municipalities will engage with Indigenous nations if they choose to do this in their area. And I kind of look at it as we'll create a framework that member municipalities can then pull down and say, this works for us 100%, we want to add to it, we want to take a little bit away, but then it creates a known process for the municipality and makes it maybe a little less bumpy in terms of working this out. Excuse me for a second. Because at the end of the day, if the Indigenous nation chooses to do it, say buy a piece of land in High River and add it to their reserve, the approving body is the federal government, not the municipality. So this is really just a framework for how to work together. So is there going to be a servicing agreement, those kinds of things? And so we're really at the front end of that. We've had a kickoff meeting with the members that were interested in being part of the active creation group. And we're now reaching out to the Indigenous nations in the region to ask them if they want to be involved, how they want to be involved, and then we'll start to make sure that we get this document hammered out over the next year. The water roadmap, as Greg highlighted, it's a passion of your mayor, and I'm going to guess a passion for a lot of you around the table. We had originally created the water roadmap back in 2018, or the water table back in 2018, 2019. We had a situation where we couldn't compare water use across all 10 member municipalities because everyone measured it a little bit different. Actually, I think there's 3 different systems of measurement. And so part of it, we couldn't say, who was the most efficient water user. And not to shame anybody, but to say, hey, what are they doing? Let's leverage their learnings and bring them on board for other members, or at least give them that opportunity. Really what we're looking for is we're going to update what that looks like. And so looking at water and wastewater initiatives. So does a regional or sub-regional initiative for water use or water sharing make sense? Also water conservation and water protection. So what is the best way to ensure that we don't have a tremendous amount of surface water, as Greg had mentioned. What's the best way to ensure we get the most value out of every drop? And also stormwater use and reuse. How do we maximize that, as we know that the next million people are going to be coming here? And really what this is going to do is set a clear scope amongst the 8 members for how we're going to update the water roadmap with all those pieces in play. On the regional transportation and transit master plan, we see the same thing. So just instead of water, we're looking at transit and transportation in the region. As Jamie would know, and Khalid, prior to the creation of the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board, a number of members in the northern part of the region were asked by Alberta Transportation to create what was called the North Calgary Regional Transportation Study. In effect, the government of Alberta was getting sick of, Airdrie, Rocky View County, Calgary, and Cochrane all high-fiving each other as they walked in and out of the minister's office to lobby for their project, in some case literally within 5-kilometer stretch of a road. And so Alberta Transport said, listen, create a normalized playing field, figure out what is your biggest priorities, and then come back to us with that. We used that as a foundational structure and expanded it out to the south and east part of the region, created the exact same review, and then melded the two together and came up with the top 20 lists of projects in the region. This is the next step. So how are we going to plan for transit and transpo as we see the growth structure that is outlined in the growth plan, and how best to provide transit and transportation to those areas? The interesting thing is that the province uses that document from Edmonton, which they completed theirs about 18 months ago, and uses the North and South Calgary Regional Transportation Studies. That's what they use for their long-term planning. So we have a massive opportunity here to tell the province what we want, and more or less the Department of Transportation said, yeah, this makes good sense to us, and that's how they make some serious funding decisions. So it's really important work, but it's really huge. And so that's why we're going to take some time to get the scope appropriate before we spend probably in an order of around $600,000 to $700,000 to do a regional transportation and transit master plan. Next slide, please. So here, joint planning areas. This is a little bit of it's an implementation of the growth plan. So as I already highlighted, the joint planning areas, the way that they are structured is that the terms of reference need to be completed and filed with the board no later than February 15th, 2023, 6 months after the plans came into effect. And then the context studies that the terms of reference are going to set up have to be completed no later than August 15th of 2024, so 3 years after the growth plan came into effect. And the last significant initiative we're working on is environmentally sensitive areas. So the regulation required us to create policies around environmentally sensitive areas. However, environmentally sensitive areas is not a defined term. So the board had to agree upon what an environmentally sensitive area is and created a definition of that, and we see that in the growth plan. This is the next step of creating a regional ESA database because not dissimilar to what we found in water, different municipalities are calling different things or calling the same thing by different terminology, and so we're really going to normalize this so we can do apples to apples comparison. The key thing to remember or to note here is that we're not going to ask members to go out and map every acre of their jurisdictions. We're a growth management board, so as we are looking to growth to happen, we're going to ask the member to task the developer, who's going to be out on the ground anyway, to collect some of this information and give it back to us so that we can create a database and look really at regional or sub-regional features and how they work together and perform. This we are kicking off next week, actually, this work. We just finished executing the contract. And it'll recommend planning and mitigation strategies to fulfill the board's plan or the board's vision and the growth plan. Next slide, please. So here, because I have a political background and I am not a planner nor an engineer, I just really like charts so I can see where everything is and I can point to you like, we're okay. So this just really outlines the initiatives that we're undertaking, as well as some that we know are coming in the future that we're budgeting for and planning for. Some of the work we're doing today is going to inform some of this work in the future. Greg, did you want to take the next steps?
Yeah, and I think, thank you. So and we'll go to the next slide. And then this is our very last slide, and then we're all done. So our jobs as the board is the stewards of the growth and servicing plan. They've been approved by the minister. There's a review cycle that will take place over time. But really right now, it's about standing up those growth and servicing plans, putting them in place. That's both, again, like I say, the rules-based, what do we put where kind of questions, and then I think the higher order stuff that Jordan's talked through in terms of the value add or the things that are going to have a pretty big impact as we get deeper into those projects: economic development, indigenous relations, transit and transportation, water, environmentally sensitive areas. Those sorts of things are, I think, going to have a pretty significant positive impact on the region over time. But there's a lot of work there, and that's going to take some time and some coordination. Maybe some trial and effort, trial and error as well along the way. And I think more than anything, it's going to take some goodwill. What I'll just reflect on as having been chair now for almost 2 years, it'll be 2 years at the end of this year. The approach that the board has taken, the culture on this particular board, is really encouraging. The way we work together as a region, the way the board members work together, even where there's disagreement, it's reasonable, and it's querying and questioning. Administration, your administration teams, working with Jordan and our team, it's a really healthy relationship. Again, there's not always everyone in tremendous agreement about absolutely everything, but we wouldn't expect that, and that's not actually what we want. We want good questions back and forth, because with that kind of dialogue comes, I think, better outcomes. And that's what we're striving for. So as long as we can maintain those solid relationships, we can always rely on that where there might be differences of perspective, because that's really the purpose of CMRB, is to have those conversations in a coordinated way, see if we can find mutually agreeable solutions and move forward. So part of that is going to be our strategy session early in the new year. All CMRB members and designates are invited to the strategy session. And then we always include as many stakeholders as possible, try to be as open as we possibly can. I'm always interested in your input and thoughts on any and all of this as well. Stakeholders that we should be including. We have regular stakeholder updates at our different committees and to the board as necessary and as appropriate. Always interested in your thoughts on who we may want to include in those sorts of things. So with that, on to the next slide. We'll offer our thanks and open it up for Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jace. Wow, gotta get used to that. It's really tuned in. Thanks, Jason and Greg. Appreciate all that great information, especially for the newer counselors here. It's good to get a really good overview of what's happening. So you hear little bits and pieces, and this was great. So we're gonna open it up to questions from counselors, if there's any. Jamie Kinghorn.
Nice to see I'm not blank anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
You didn't touch on it at all, but one of the things that we hear as in the council, and I understand the process, but we have some new council members, and of course the members of the public are watching. We hear this term called Calgary veto, and I don't believe it's a veto, really. I know the system is set up in such a way that we all have input and can make things happen within our growth areas. Can you explain that in a really short, instead of like the 6-page document, to explain what that term is for and why it's not necessarily correct?
Sure. So the voting model of the board, which is outlined in the regulation and actually mirrors the EMRB, they're identical, is that in order for a motion to pass at the board, 2/3 of the members who represent 2/3 of the population have to vote in favor. So in effect, what it means is that the city of Calgary plus 5 others need to vote for something for it to pass. The important thing to note is that you can stop the Calgary veto is that the city of Calgary individually can stop something from happening. If they vote against it, it doesn't pass. However, they can't make anything happen. They cannot force something on the region or another member municipality without bringing along 5 other votes. And so this has been maybe that's why we're getting feedback that Mike was on. This has been an issue kind of since inception. It has been an issue since the EMRB was created back when it was the Capital Region Board. A little history, I was with Premier Stelmach when he created the Capital Region Board. This is a way to balance off the fact that we have a single member of a board who comprises, in our case, about 84% of the region's population. And so how do you strike a balance between, you know, is it one member, one vote? Or is it, you know, is it by population, in which case Calgary would just make every single decision, whatever they wanted would happen? Or do you strike a balance between the two? And that was the, I would say, the Solomon's choice that came up with in 2008. And I know it's been tested several times, and we've yet to see it come back. Important to note that the board chose on its committee structure is that it's just a simple majority. So committees make recommendations to the board, but they don't actually pass anything 100%, and so it's a simple majority, and then it goes to the board for the vote. Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks, thanks, Jason. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So I'm curious to know about the whole water situation, because in the slide it showed 23% reduction in households is the anticipated projections, I think. But if we have 4% of the water in the province with 40% of the population, and we're looking at growing that, you know, by 1 million people over the next 30 years, where are we going to get the agua? I think is a big question for me, because, you know, are we going to have to try a layered approach? Are we going to have to look at a pipeline from the north? Like, where is it going to come from?
All great questions. And
In your crystal ball.
I'll maybe ask Greg to weigh in on this as well, but I would say that, back to what I've already stated in one way, 4 years ago, we couldn't accurately measure water across the region. We didn't agree on it. We didn't agree on which transportation project was the most imperative to go forward. And so, like anything, we're starting to build this collaboration on things that we can agree on, and then smaller, and then getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Next step in terms of scoping out the update of the regional water roadmap would be looking at, does it make sense to have a, you know, and I'm not wanting to predict it, but do we look to our, you know, sister city to the north and say, should we have an EPCOR that has all the water in the region? A little bit of a different issue. We have a closed basin, and water licenses are an incredibly valuable form of currency. So we have a different way to tackle it. Do we look at, you know, two regional water commissions, hypothetically, that address, you know, the north and the south? And then do we talk to the province about appurtenance? And, you know, so that's with, if you have a water license out of the river, it is exact to this area. Okay, so does that limit us from sharing water around the region and being the most efficient we can be with it? I'm not a water engineer, I don't know. But our perspective is that we're going to build towards that. And so as we're updating the water roadmap, those are all questions that we're going to be looking to throw onto the table. And we're going to be bringing on a consultant to help us with that. They're kind of a unique breed to find, and so we're out there beating the bushes right now, but we've yet to find one that kind of meets all the needs that we have for it. That project is still on track for time. We knew it would take some time to find the exact right consultant to help us, and so we're working on it. In terms of the solution, I mean, we're really looking at, you know, stormwater use, water reuse. How do we extract every use out of a drop of water before it goes back to the river? How do we look, you know, we're working with the province in terms of, you know, dams. They're obviously taking a look at it in terms of the moving of the dam on the Bow. But, you know, is that strictly for flood, or is it flood and drought? Do we need to look at other, or not do we need to, but when do we need to look at other areas in order to address that? Do we need to look at, if one part of the region is water scarce, do we institute, you know, water restriction for the entire region? All questions that'll be on the table as we go through the scoping exercise. And, you know, we're going to build it one brick at a time. And, you know, it's, when we started this, we had some members that say you got to do the great big leap. Sometimes if you do the great big leap, you don't quite get across the other side. I prefer to kind of build it one piece at a time, and then you keep, you have something you can rely upon, you have something you go back and work together on. And we're all facing the same challenges. It's just when we're going to run into that wall. We've done the mapping or the math out on current water licenses and current water use. Every municipality in the region by 2070 will be out of water, with the exception of Rocky View County. Facts. We know this. So how do we change that? There's ways, right? Water reuse, all that kind of stuff. But we need to start to work together on it now, so we're not, implementing water restrictions in 2052 and going, oh no, what do we do? We have time now, and so it's not immediate, which makes it hard to create urgency, but it's not that far off. Greg, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's Jordan's, as usual, given us a pretty good summary of it. And I think the water roadmap is step one on that path. Let's quantify, let's understand the nature of the challenge that we face. And good information makes for good decisions. And I also like to say that a lot of these things are facts, whether we know them or not, so I'd rather know them. And let's get our head around what the current situation is, and we can build some good policy and from there.
Any more questions? Councillor Nychuk.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate the time. This isn't so much a question as it is maybe some clarity for the newer councillors that we have. The board is acting as a partnership, as a collaboration. The MGA still governs the process of development. So all those things that are there, service plans, ASPs, all that stuff, it still needs to be there. This board does not change any of that legislation that's already in place. So I just wanted to make sure that they understood that there was still the government of Alberta that still shows us the roadmap, and we work within that framework as the board. So.
Great comment, Councillor. I would say the only, by agreeing to the growth plan and the policies in the growth plan, it's just kind of like it's a floor, but the MGA still applies to everything that every municipality does.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and thank you to you both for being here today again. I'm curious to know about the Indigenous component too, and the educations and learnings that you're achieving. Is that going to be made available to the membership to like if there's an educational component or any of those learnings that are available to members of the CMRB? Like what does that look like in terms of future understanding and development of collaboration with our Indigenous partners?
Amazing question. So last June, we held the first of 2 workshops that we termed Indigenous Awareness. So I believe we had said 2 to 3 members from each municipality could participate. When I say last June, sorry, I should be clear, June of 2021. Sorry, time's going by way too quick. But as many members of administration or council could watch. We just didn't want it because it was still virtual, and we were worried about managing the numbers, and it was delivered by Ann Harding, who is our consultant helping us with this. And I believe Ann delivered some Indigenous awareness workshop here a little over a year ago, October 31st of last year. Sorry, Chris, I don't want to speak out of turn here. And delivered some Indigenous awareness. Yeah.
That's correct.
So in terms of when we get to that point and we're going to do it again, we would definitely throw it open, and maybe it's recorded or a hybrid of being online and in person. But yeah, definitely working to make that as broad as possible. We're still we're learning as we go. We're building the car as we're heading to the destination, and we're going to make a few mistakes. But our intent is to make sure that the more people that are involved, the more people who are aware, the better off it is.
I guess I'd add that this initiative, as I think all Indigenous relations initiatives should be, are a co-creation with Indigenous nations and communities who have different perspectives, objectives. So we envision the CMRB being as much of a central touch point as we can be to both help our member municipalities engage with Indigenous communities in a meaningful way, but also allow those Indigenous nations to streamline their discussions. So instead of having 8 separate discussions, can work with CMRB and say, here's our sort of, foundational, let's create a foundational understanding. And then each individual municipality and each individual nation will also have bilateral connections on specific questions that are relevant to each community. The idea is to make this as streamlined as possible, but that won't always necessarily be, it's not an either or, it's an and, it's an in addition to. And then making sure that we're always working in hand with Indigenous nations as they, want to engage. We can't really force anything. We want to make it as valuable as possible. So yeah, as Jordan said, it's very much a journey, but that's, we've engaged some really good advice and some good support in doing that. In fact, Métis Nation Region 3 is joining us on Friday at the board meeting. It's a Métis week, so they're going to be joining us this Friday as a current example of that work.
No. Step back from it. Is there any more questions from councillors? Oh, didn't see that. Councillor Kinghorn.
Just to close off a little bit, again, thanks for coming out. We really appreciate you taking your time. Do you have a scheduled appointment or a meeting with the MD as well to do the same presentation? I should say county.
Yes, so we've reached out to all 8 members of the Calgary Metropolitan Region Board. It was clear from the board as we set my goals for the year that this is one of the things that the board wishes me to focus on. So yes, we've reached out to all 8, endeavoring to schedule this discussion. Hoping to do it by the end of the year. Looks like I think maybe one of them is gonna slide into next year. But yes, the objective is to meet with all 8 if we can. You happen to be first, by the way. You said yes for before anyone else. So, yeah.
Okay, it looks like we're good for questions. Everybody? Good, Jenny? Okay. Greg and Jason, really appreciate you guys coming down the road and enlightening us on all that's happening with the CMRB and appreciate your time. So,
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
with that being said, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Committee of the Whole meeting on November 14th, 2022 is adjourned at 1:53 p.m.